The United Nations Climate Summit was supposed to end on Friday, but now the summit has gone into a bit of an overtime after nations failed to agree on a deal. The Loss and Damage Fund has been a hot topic at this year's climate summit, where the poor nations have in fact asked the richer nations to provide them with compensation for their historical emission of greenhouse gases. And the talks surrounding this monetary fund has been going back and forth. The proposals are being made by the countries to reach a middle ground as they are trying to bridge the divisions over funding relief for climate change disasters, as well as for commitments for long-term action. But the talks seem to have reached a bit of a deadlock, and it looks set to drag on through the weekend. After the negotiations stretched through the night and the European Union roundly rejected a draft document from Egypt.
We want a good decision. But it's better to have no decision than a bad decision. We still believe a good decision is within reach, but all partners will have to work very hard to make that possible. And a good decision means that we remain on track to keep 1.5 alive. We do not want 1.5 Celsius to die here.
Now, this comes after the European Union had made a bit of a surprise offer. The summit EU's proposals came on two of the thorniest issues, and that is tying compensation for climate disasters to tougher emission cuts. The proposal would also create a pool of money for poor nations in exchange for a pledge to phase down oil, gas and coal. The European Union climate chief later explained that the bloc is in fact proposing a fund really focused on the most vulnerable and funded by all those who can in fact muster the funds. Now, the issue of compensation and emission cuts are two sides of the same coin as far as the European Union is concerned, making clear that the 27-nation bloc won't offer more money unless there are concessions that are made on emission targets.
We have Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia blocking language around fossil fuel phase out, with the notion that we should be in this space talking about emissions and not energy, or we should be talking about climate and not energy, as if these two things are somehow separated from each other. That's like saying that we, in talking about the economy, can't talk about money.
And this, of course, comes as a shock for the poorer nations as they have to bear the brunt of climate change, stepped up by the urgency of what is happening around them. They've accused the richer polluters of stalling and have said that they cannot wait another year for the creation of a fund to pay for the damages.
I came to COP to attend and also to pressure our leader to make sure that they have been able to put loss and damage as one of the main topics.
All of the agenda items that have finance on it, or the global goal of adaptation, on all of the other things that actually are very much important to the African continent, are yet far from being concluded or reach an agreement that actually satisfies the actual need of the continent.
The rich nations agreed in past conferences to spend about $100 billion per year to help the poorer nations to develop cleaner energy systems and also to adapt to prevent future disasters. They, however, have lagged in actually disbursing the funds, and this, of course, has been the thorniest issue in the talks with respect to the COP27 summit as well. And to give us more insights in terms of how these talks at COP27 will proceed, we are being joined by David Stewart, who is the chairman of the F.W. de Klerk Foundation. Mr. Stewart, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. The question that I want to ask you is, of course, this. You know, ever since the COP27 summit began, there have been a lot of expectations in terms of what would be the outcome of the COP27 summit, but there are clear differences of opinions and clear points of divergence in the nations who are talking and negotiating with each other. Do you think this thorny issue of loss and damage fund will be resolved today?
Well, we certainly hope so, because this is an agreement that everybody in the world needs. We can't have a failure at this stage.
Now, last year, they had in fact agreed to disburse a sum of $100 billion, but the money hasn't been forthcoming from the richer nations, has it? Because the richer nations have made a sort of a commitment of sorts where they've said that they would disburse this fund over a period of time, but that money hasn't been forthcoming.
Well, a commitment of sorts isn't good enough. The reality is that it is the the poorer nations of the world that are going to have to pay the price for global warming, especially my continent, Africa.
Absolutely, indeed. That of course, is the issue which a lot of these poorer nations have said. They've said that these nations who are rich today, in fact, made their progress by burning a lot of coal, which resulted in the earth getting heated up. And they're asking for funds from the richer nations now so that they can now adopt greener technologies. Like you mentioned, Africa is at risk of climate change. Pakistan, for instance, earlier this year, because of the flooding that was witnessed, pretty much a third of the country went down under. Do you think the richer nations are serious in addressing this imbalance between the richer nations who created this pollution in the first place, but it is the poor nations who seem to be paying the brunt of it?
Well, we'll know how serious they are when they reach agreement on helping poorer countries to eliminate carbon emissions. The reality is that you referred to Pakistan. The floods have cost Pakistan $30 billion straight away. So richer nations really must put their hands in their pockets if they are serious about climate change. My country, South Africa, generates almost 85% of its electricity from coal. Now, we have lots and lots of coal. How is South Africa going to be compensated for actually getting rid of one of its largest natural assets?
Absolutely. And my last question to you, Mr. Stewart, is this. These meetings of climate change that take place, we had COP26 last year. It is COP27 this time around. They've been criticized as nothing more than talking shops, where these top leaders from around the world congregate in these fancy resorts and they talk to each other, but there is no concrete sort of a forward plan that is agreed upon. Do you think these kind of summits even have any relevance in the present day world?
This is a huge problem. How can we talk about really reversing climate change when hundreds of the delegates to the COP27 conference have arrived in their own private jets? So we really need to see action rather than words.
Absolutely, indeed. That, of course, is what you'd expect. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stewart, for taking time out and speaking to us here on WION, because this is something that the leaders need to understand. They've congregated in Sharm el-Sheikh, coming there in their private jets, causing a lot of pollution, and they simply can't seem to, in fact, come to an agreement on how to take things forward. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stewart, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.